My mom couldn't come today, so I came for her. The girl whispered softly, holding a folder with both hands. For a moment, Daniel simply stared at her. This, he said calmly, gesturing around the conference room, is a job interview. This isn't really a place children come to. The girl walked forward before he finished speaking. Carefully, she placed the manila folder on his desk. Daniel glanced down. Written neatly across the front were the words, Monica Carter, application for executive assistant. Daniel looked up again. What exactly are you doing here? He asked. The girl folded her hands politely in front of her. My name is Annie Carter, sir. And how old are you, Annie? 6. Daniel nodded once. Well, Annie, I can tell you right away this is a little unusual. She looked at him steadily. My mom was supposed to come, and she didn't. Why not? My grandma got sick last night, Annie said quietly. She had trouble breathing. Mom had to take her to Cook County Hospital this morning. Daniel studied her carefully. So because of that, he said slowly, you decided to come here instead. Yes, sir. Daniel rested his elbows lightly on the desk. Annie, let me explain something to you. He turned slightly and gestured toward the glass wall behind her. Outside the conference room, several adults sat in the waiting area, men and women in suits, each holding folders just like the one on his desk. Every one of those people out there, Daniel said, came here to apply for the same job. Annie turned to look. They filled out their own applications, he continued. They came themselves. They're waiting their turn for interviews. He tapped the folder lightly. There isn't a rule that allows someone to submit an application for another person. Annie listened carefully. Daniel added, in fact, I've been doing interviews like this for a long time. I've heard every explanation you can imagine. He leaned back slightly. People tell me they were late because of traffic, or a sick relative, or a problem with childcare. He paused. And sometimes, those reasons are real. Annie looked down briefly. But sometimes, Daniel continued calmly, they're just excuses. The girl remained quiet. Then she looked up again. My mom doesn't make excuses. Daniel didn't reply. She's been trying to find a job for months, Annie said softly. Sometimes she goes to 2 interviews in one day. Daniel's expression remained neutral, but he listened. Sometimes people say they'll call her back, Annie continued. And they don't. Daniel felt a familiar heaviness behind the girl's simple words. He had heard stories like this before, far more often than most people realized. My mom worked really hard on this one, Annie said. She gently pushed the folder a little closer toward him. She practiced typing at night, and she learned spreadsheets on an old computer from church. Daniel glanced down at the application again. Then he slid it back toward her. Annie, he said kindly but firmly, if your mother wants this job, she needs to bring this application herself. The girl didn't pick up the folder. Instead, she looked straight at him. Sir. Her voice was small but steady. Could you please give my mom one chance? Daniel said nothing. Just one chance to work, Annie continued. She really wants to do better for us. Daniel watched the girl closely. After a moment, Daniel leaned back again. All right, he said slowly. Annie's eyes brightened slightly. But before I consider anything, Daniel continued, I want to ask you something. The girl nodded immediately. Yes, sir. Daniel folded his hands together. If your mother got this job, he said, what do you think would make her good at it? Annie thought for a moment. Then she answered, my mom doesn't give up. Daniel raised an eyebrow slightly. That's a nice quality, he said. But this job requires organization, responsibility, and trust. Annie nodded seriously. My mom wakes up early every day, she said, even when she doesn't have work. Daniel listened. She writes things down in a notebook, Annie continued. Appointments, reminders, phone numbers. Daniel's expression sharpened slightly. And she always remembers things people forget. Daniel leaned forward a little. Like what? Like birthdays, Annie said. And doctor visits. And when grandma needs her medicine. She paused before adding quietly, she also helps neighbors fill out forms because they don't understand them. Daniel remained silent for several seconds. Then he asked one more question. If your mom has been looking for work for months, he said, why do you think people haven't hired her yet? Annie hesitated. Her eyes dropped to the desk. Finally, she answered honestly, maybe they didn't see what she could do. Daniel studied the girl across from him. Annie sat very still in the large leather chair, her small feet not quite reaching the floor. Daniel Whitmore slowly picked up the folder again. He didn't say anything else, but for the first time that morning, he opened the application and began to read. Daniel turned the first page of the application. Monica Carter, address on the South Side, previous positions, administrative support, medical billing assistant, part-time office coordinator, church records, volunteer. The timeline told a story without trying to. 3 months without stable work, temporary contracts before that, a note about evening coursework in office software. Daniel turned another page. Certificates from a community training program. Typing speed listed at 63 words per minute. Familiarity with spreadsheets, scheduling software, and client intake records. He had seen far worse applications that morning. He glanced up briefly at Annie. The girl was watching him closely but trying very hard not to interrupt. Daniel returned to the papers. Experience managing appointment calendars, organizing files, handling incoming calls, helping patients complete insurance forms at a small clinic. That last line made him pause. He looked up again. Your mother worked at a clinic? Annie nodded immediately. Yes, sir. What kind of clinic? A small one near our church. She helped people fill out paperwork. Daniel tapped the line with his finger. For how long? Almost a year, Annie said. But the clinic closed. Daniel nodded slowly. That explained the gap. He continued reading. There were handwritten notes in the margins of the resume. Little reminders Monica had apparently written to herself while practicing. Remember to smile. Explain scheduling experience. Mention Excel class. Daniel closed the folder for a moment. Your mother practiced interviews, he said. Annie nodded. Yes, sir. She talks to herself sometimes, Annie added earnestly. But not in a strange way. Just practicing. Daniel almost smiled. He tapped the folder lightly on the desk. Annie. Yes, sir. You understand something important. Yes, sir. If I allow your mother to apply after today, that means she'll have an advantage those people out there didn't get. Annie turned her head toward the waiting area again. They looked older, taller, more confident. People who clearly belonged in places like this. She turned back slowly. Yes, sir. So why? Daniel asked carefully. Should I make an exception? The girl thought for several seconds, not the quick answer of someone trying to impress, the kind of thinking that meant she was trying to be honest. Finally, she said quietly, because my mom never gets exceptions. If this moment touched your heart, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and tell us where you are watching from. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories about courage, fairness, and second chances. Daniel leaned back slightly. Explain that. Most people already decide before the interview, Annie said. Daniel raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? My mom says sometimes people see your address and think they already know your story. The words landed softly but firmly. Daniel did not interrupt. She says sometimes people see where you live and think you'll be late or cause trouble or leave soon. Annie looked down briefly. But my mom always shows up early. Daniel felt something shift inside him. He glanced again at the address on the application. South Shore. Not the easiest commute to downtown Chicago. Does your mother have a car? He asked. No, sir. How does she get to interviews? The bus. Daniel checked the time on the application. Several interviews listed early in the morning. He did the math automatically. That meant Monica Carter was leaving home before sunrise most days she had interviews. Daniel rested his fingers against the desk. You said she's been looking for work for months. Yes, sir. How many interviews? Annie tried to remember. Maybe 10 or 12, and none of them hired her. No, sir. Daniel nodded slowly. He had seen capable people overlooked before. It happened more often than most executives like to admit. He opened the folder again. Tell me something else, he said. Yes, sir. If your mother got this job, what do you think she would do first? Annie smiled faintly for the first time since entering the room. She would buy groceries. Daniel blinked. Groceries? Yes, sir. What kind? Real groceries. Daniel almost laughed. What are fake groceries? The ones from the dollar store, Annie said matter-of-factly. Daniel closed the folder again. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel reached for the phone on his desk. Annie sat up straighter, but instead of dialing, Daniel simply pressed a button. The door opened a moment later and Linda Reyes stepped in. Yes, Mr. Whitmore? Daniel held up the folder. Add one more applicant to today's list. Linda looked surprised. Another interview? Daniel nodded. Monica Carter. Linda glanced briefly toward Annie. Should I schedule her for later this week? Daniel shook his head. Today. Linda hesitated. She isn't here. Daniel slid the folder across the desk. Call the number on the application. Linda picked up the resume and scanned the contact information. Now? She asked. Yes. Linda nodded. I'll handle it. She turned to leave but paused beside Annie. You did quite a brave thing today, she said gently. Annie gave a small, polite nod. Linda left the room. Silence settled again. Daniel looked across the desk at the small girl who had walked into his office and quietly turned his entire morning upside down. Annie. Yes, sir. Your mother is going to get her interview. Annie's eyes widened slightly. But understand something, Daniel continued. She will get the same interview as everyone else. Yes, sir. No special treatment. Yes, sir. And if she gets the job, it will be because she earned it. Annie nodded firmly. That's what my mom would want. Daniel believed her. He leaned back in his chair again. You should probably call your mother, he said. I don't have a phone, Annie admitted. Daniel thought for a moment. Then he slid his phone across the desk. You can use mine. Annie looked at it carefully, as if it were something expensive and fragile. Thank you, sir. She dialed slowly, reading the number from memory. Daniel watched quietly while the call connected. Annie held the phone to her ear. Mom, she said softly. There was a pause. Then Annie's face brightened just a little. Yes, I'm okay. Another pause. I'm at the office building. Daniel could hear a faint voice through the phone. Annie continued carefully. No, Mom, I'm not in trouble. She glanced at Daniel. The boss wants to talk to you about the job. Daniel looked down at the folder again while Annie spoke to her mother. For the first time that morning, he felt curious about what kind of woman raised a 6-year-old brave enough to walk into a corporate office alone and ask for a chance. When Annie finished the call, she handed the phone back politely. She's coming, Annie said. Daniel nodded. All right. Outside the glass wall, the next candidate stood and straightened his tie. Inside the conference room, Daniel Whitmore reopened Monica Carter's application and began reading it again more carefully than before. Monica Carter arrived 43 minutes later, breathless, apologetic, and visibly torn between embarrassment and fear. Daniel saw her through the glass wall before she entered the conference room. She came off the elevator in a dark navy blouse and a black skirt that had been pressed in a hurry. Her hair was pulled back neatly, though a few loose strands had escaped near her temples. She held her purse too tightly, the way people do when they are trying to keep themselves from falling apart in public. Linda Reyes stepped toward her first, saying something softly, then guided her down the hallway. Annie, who had been sitting quietly for the past half hour with a cup of water Linda had brought her, slid off her chair the moment she saw her mother. Mom, the word was barely out before Monica crossed the room and knelt in front of her daughter, taking both of Annie's shoulders in her hands. Annie Carter, she whispered, not loudly, but with the full force of a frightened mother trying not to make a scene. Do you have any idea how worried I was? I'm sorry, Mom, Annie said at once. I just wanted to help. Monica closed her eyes for a second. Daniel looked away, giving them that small dignity. He had seen many versions of power in his life: money, status, influence, fear. But there was a quieter kind in that moment. A tired woman holding on to her child with one hand while trying to preserve her pride with the other. When Monica stood, she turned toward Daniel. I am so sorry, Mr. Whitmore. Her voice was controlled, but only just. She should never have come here alone. I didn't know she had left the apartment until I got her call. Daniel gestured toward the chair across from him. Please, sit down. Monica hesitated, then sat. Annie remained close to her mother's side, one hand wrapped around the edge of her skirt. Daniel picked up the application from his desk. Your daughter brought this in herself. Monica gave a weary exhale. Yes, I can see that. She also made a very determined argument on your behalf. At that, Monica glanced at Annie, and for the first time the edge in her expression softened into something complicated. Part frustration, part heartbreak, part reluctant admiration. She gets that from my mother, Monica said quietly. Daniel nodded once. How is your mother now? The question seemed to catch Monica off guard. She's stable, she said after a moment. They gave her oxygen and some medication. She lowered her eyes briefly. She's had a weak chest for years. Every winter it gets worse. Daniel absorbed that without comment. Monica straightened in her chair. Mr. Whitmore, before anything else, I need to say this clearly. I did not send my daughter here to speak for me. I would never put her in that position. I believe you, Daniel said. That surprised her. For the first time since entering the room, Monica looked directly at him. Daniel folded his hands over the application. Your daughter told me you've been looking for work for several months. Monica gave a small nod. That's true. And today was your interview for the executive assistant role. Yes, sir. Were you planning to withdraw? Monica hesitated. No, she said honestly. I was planning to call and ask whether I could still submit my application, even if I missed the scheduled time. Daniel studied her. That would have been the proper thing to do. A flicker of shame crossed Monica's face. Yes, sir, but it isn't what happened. No, sir. The room fell quiet. Outside, the waiting area had thinned. A few applicants were still seated, though the morning rush was nearly over. Below them, the city moved in slow midday rhythm, all buses and delivery trucks and office workers hurrying back from lunch. Daniel glanced once at Annie. You may sit over there, he told her gently, nodding toward a smaller chair near the side wall. Your mother and I need to speak. Annie looked at Monica first. It's all right, Monica said softly. Annie nodded and moved to the chair, folding her hands in her lap again. Daniel returned his attention to Monica. Tell me something, he said. If your daughter had not come here today, what would you have done next? Monica let out a breath through her nose. I would have stayed at the hospital with my mother until she was settled. Then I would have gone home, changed clothes if I had time, and called your office. And after that, she met his gaze. I would have kept looking. The answer came too quickly to be rehearsed. It had the sound of someone who had been forced to say it to herself more than once. Daniel nodded. I reviewed your application. Monica seemed unsure whether that was good news or bad. You have stronger qualifications than some of the people I interviewed this morning. A faint crease formed between her brows. Then why am I sitting here instead of in an actual interview? She asked quietly. Daniel almost smiled at the directness of it. Because, he said, this situation is highly irregular. Monica glanced at Annie and then back to him. Yes, sir, it is. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Your daughter asked me to give you one chance. Monica closed her eyes briefly, almost as if the sentence pained her. I'm sorry for that. Are you? Her eyes opened. Daniel continued in a calm voice. Not sorry that she came alone. Not sorry that she frightened you. Sorry that she had to believe the burden belonged to her. Monica said nothing. For a long moment, Daniel wondered whether he had overstepped. Then Monica lowered her gaze to the edge of his desk and answered in a voice stripped of all pretense. When you spend months trying to stay ahead of bills, medicine, bus fare, and bad luck, she said. Children notice. Annie was still across the room, quietly swinging one foot, far enough not to hear every word. Monica continued. I tried not to let her see too much. I really did. But my mother got worse this week. And this interview. She touched the application lightly with 2 fingers. This one mattered. Why? Because it's not another overnight shift, not another temporary contract, not cleaning offices for people who never learn your name. Her voice remained steady, but there was steel in it now. It's the kind of job where you can stop surviving from week to week. Daniel listened carefully. The honesty in the room had changed shape. It was no longer the brave honesty of a child. It was the weary honesty of an adult who no longer had energy for embellishment. Your daughter said you practice interview answers out loud. That drew the faintest, most embarrassed smile from Monica. I do. Why? Because I'm better when I've heard the words once before. Daniel nodded as if that made perfect sense. It does, he said. Something in Monica's posture eased a little. He turned one page of her application and tapped the section on office coordination. You worked at a clinic. Yes. You handled appointment scheduling and patient forms. Yes, sir. For almost a year, until funding was cut. Daniel lifted his eyes. And before that, a church office, part-time, community records, volunteer schedules, donation logs. He nodded. You're organized. I have to be. Another honest answer. Daniel appreciated those. He closed the folder and rested both hands over it. Here is what I'm prepared to do. Monica straightened. I will not bend the rules so far that I insult every applicant who showed up on time today. A shadow crossed her face, but she said nothing. However, Daniel continued, I am willing to conduct an interview this afternoon after business hours. Monica blinked. He went on before she could answer. It will be formal. It will be thorough. It will count exactly as much as every other interview I conducted today. Monica looked at him for a moment, as if testing whether kindness always came with conditions. And Annie? She asked. Linda, who had discreetly returned to the doorway a few minutes earlier with a folder in hand, stepped inside. If it helps, Linda said gently, I can sit with her during the interview. I have crayons in my desk. Long story. Annie looked up immediately. Really? Linda smiled. Really? Monica's eyes shifted from Linda to Daniel and back again. The gratitude there was immediate, but so was caution. I don't want charity, Mr. Whitmore. Daniel held her gaze. Good, he said. I'm not offering charity. He tapped the application once. I'm offering an interview. For the first time, Monica let herself breathe. Across the room, Annie looked from one adult to the other, sensing the change even if she did not fully understand the language of it. Mom, she whispered. Does that mean? Monica turned in her chair and held out her hand to her daughter. It means, she said, her voice gentler now, that I have a chance. Annie slipped her hand into hers. Daniel looked at the two of them and, against his own expectations, remembered something Margaret Doyle had once told him after a difficult hiring round. Sometimes the best person for the job is the one who has had to work twice as hard just to stand in the room. He rose from his chair. Take your daughter to lunch, he said. Come back at 2:30. Monica stood at once. Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. He gave a small nod. We'll see whether thanks are necessary after the interview. A trace of dignity returned to Monica's face at that. She preferred it this way, measured, earned, unsentimental. As she gathered the application and Annie reached for her hand, Daniel added one final thing. Miss Carter. She turned back. Next time, he said, looking briefly at Annie. Don't let a 6-year-old negotiate your future for you. Something like tired humor flickered in Monica's eyes. With all due respect, sir, she said, I'm not sure anyone could have stopped her. That time, Daniel did smile. When the door closed behind them, Linda remained in the room for a second longer. Well, she said, that was a first. Daniel looked out at the city beyond the glass. Yes, he said quietly. It was. At 2:30 sharp, Monica Carter returned to Whitmore Strategic Consulting with Annie beside her, and determination written all over her face. This time she looked different to Daniel, not less tired, not less worried, but steadier. The panic of the morning had settled into something more useful focus. She wore the same navy blouse and black skirt, but now her posture had changed. She stood a little straighter, her shoulders squared as if she had spent the past hour reminding herself who she was before life taught her to apologize for taking up space. Annie held her mother's hand until they reached the reception desk. Linda Reyes came around from behind her station with a warm smile and crouched slightly so she was at Annie's eye level. Ready for those crayons I promised? Annie looked up at her mother first. Monica smoothed one braid gently behind Annie's shoulder. You stay with Miss Linda, all right? Yes, Mom. And no wandering. I know. Linda extended her hand with mock seriousness. I also have animal crackers, which makes this a very high-end waiting experience. That earned the first real smile Daniel had seen from Annie all day. As Linda led the girl toward her office, Monica turned back toward Daniel. The smile faded, but not entirely. A little warmth remained in her expression, as if Annie's brief happiness had made the afternoon feel possible. Daniel held open the conference room door. Miss Carter. She walked in, clutching a thin notepad and a pen. Not because she needed them, Daniel suspected, but because people often held on to small objects when they were trying not to let their nerves show. Once the door closed, the room returned to quiet. The city beyond the glass had shifted into afternoon light now. Less silver than before, warmer at the edges. The Chicago River caught the sun in broken ribbons. A tour boat moved below like a bright toy in the canyon of buildings. Daniel took his seat at the far end of the polished table. Monica sat across from him. He opened a fresh legal pad. All right, he said. This is now a formal interview. Yes, sir. You may call me Mr. Whitmore during the interview. Yes, sir. He noticed the quickness of her answers, the instinctive respect, not weakness. Training, the kind that came from years of dealing with landlords, managers, doctors, bus drivers, and school administrators. Anyone with even a little power over your day. Daniel folded his hands. Tell me about yourself, Miss Carter. Monica took a breath. My name is Monica Carter. I've spent most of my working life in administrative support, office coordination, and client-facing roles. I've worked in small clinics, church offices, and temporary administrative positions. I'm organized, dependable, and comfortable. Managing, scheduling, records, incoming calls, and document processing. She paused, then added with calm honesty, I know my resume doesn't look polished compared to some others, but I also know I can do this work. Daniel wrote nothing for a moment. He simply listened. What makes you certain of that? She met his gaze. Because I've already done versions of it in places with fewer resources, more problems, and no room for mistakes. That answer interested him. Give me an example. At the clinic where I worked, I handled appointment confirmations, patient intake forms, billing follow-ups, and insurance paperwork. We were understaffed most of the time. If I forgot one detail, someone missed treatment, or a claim was delayed, or a family left confused, her voice stayed steady. In jobs like that, organization isn't about neat folders. It's about whether people get the help they came for. Daniel made his first note. Good under pressure. He looked up again. Why did you leave the clinic? It closed, Monica said. Funding was cut. And since then, temporary office work, church records, evening data entry when I could get it. What happened to the longer-term positions? Monica's fingers tightened slightly around her pen. Some ended. Some never became permanent. Some, she chose the word carefully, went to people who were a better cultural fit. Daniel looked at her for a long second. He knew exactly what that phrase sometimes meant. He let the silence do its work before asking the next question. And what do you think that means? Monica gave a small breath through her nose. I think sometimes people decide what kind of employee you'll be before you say a word. Based on? My address, my skin, my last employer, the fact that I'm a single mother. Pick one. The answer came without bitterness, which made it land harder. Daniel made another note, clear-eyed, not self-pitying. What would your last supervisor say about you? That I'm early, Monica replied at once. That I write everything down. That I stay calm when other people start spinning in circles. A faint smile touched one corner of her mouth. She'd also say I ask too many follow-up questions. That can be useful. It can also annoy people in charge. Daniel almost smiled. Sometimes the people in charge need annoying. Monica's expression changed for the first time. Not amusement, exactly. Recognition. He shifted slightly in his chair. This role requires discretion. You'd be handling schedules, sensitive correspondence, internal planning, and private calls. Can you manage confidential information? Yes. That's a short answer. It's the true one. He waited. Monica understood the invitation. When you work in a clinic, people hand you forms they're ashamed of. When you work in church administration, people trust you with things they don't tell their own families. If you make a habit of talking about private matters, you don't last long. Daniel nodded. That, too, was true. He flipped a page on her application. Your typing speed is strong. Your software certifications are recent. I took those classes at night. Why? Because the jobs I wanted kept asking for skills I couldn't afford not to learn. Again, simple. Again, real. Daniel leaned back. What would you do if I gave you 5 competing tasks at once? Monica answered more slowly this time. I'd ask which of them affects the company first, which affects the client first, and which only feels urgent because somebody is anxious. That answer made him look up fully. Explain. She set down her pen. In any office, there's actual urgency and emotional urgency. They aren't always the same thing. Daniel said nothing. If a client is waiting on a signed document, that matters. If an investor is arriving in 10 minutes, that matters. If someone panics because they can't find a stapler, that's just noise. She paused. Part of administrative work is knowing the difference. For the first time that day, Daniel smiled without meaning to. Monica noticed. That the wrong answer? She asked. No, he said. It's the first smart answer I've heard all day. Some of the tension left her shoulders. Outside, through the glass, Linda walked Annie past the hallway with a coloring book tucked under one arm. The little girl caught sight of her mother through the conference room wall and waved. Monica's whole face changed when she waved back. Softer, younger, almost. Daniel noticed that too. When did Annie learn to speak to adults the way she does? Monica exhaled a tired little laugh. Probably by listening. To you and my mother, he nodded. She's brave. She's nosy, Monica said dryly. Those can look similar at her age. Daniel let that sit a moment before moving to the final section of the interview. This job can be demanding. Long days at times, last-minute changes, strong personalities. Why do you want this position specifically? Monica looked down at her hands, then back at him. Because I'm tired of living one emergency away from disaster. The room went still. She continued, voice calm. I want a job where being competent actually leads somewhere. I want health insurance that means something. I want one paycheck that covers the month without 3 backup plans attached to it. Her gaze did not leave his. And I want my daughter to grow up watching me build something steadier than survival. Daniel did not write that down. Some answers did not belong on paper. He closed the legal pad. Monica straightened a little, reading nothing from his face. Is that all? She asked. For the formal questions, yes. She nodded once, controlled as ever, though he could see the uncertainty gathering at the edges. Then Daniel asked one final question, quieter than the others. If Annie had stayed home this morning, would you still have come back and fought for this? Monica didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. Mr. Whitmore, women like me fight for things every day. Quietly, without witnesses, without applause. We fight because there isn't another option. Daniel held her gaze. And yes, she said, I would have come back. That was the moment he knew. Not because of Annie, not because of sympathy, not because the day had begun with an unusual story, because Monica Carter was exactly the kind of person Margaret Doyle had once described. Someone who could protect a life from falling apart because she had spent years keeping her own from doing exactly that. Daniel stood. Monica rose too, her expression unreadable. Thank you for your time, she said, formal again. Daniel walked to the window, looked once at the city below, then turned back toward her. Ms. Carter, he said. I'd like you to wait in the reception area for a few minutes. Something flickered across her face. Hope. Guarded by experience. All right. He opened the door. Linda looked up from her desk. Annie immediately slid out of the guest chair beside her. Mom? Monica touched her daughter's shoulder. It's okay, baby. We're just waiting. Annie looked from her mother to Daniel, trying to read what adults often believed children could not see. Daniel gave nothing away. Not yet. But as Monica and Annie sat together in the late afternoon quiet of the executive floor, both waiting for the next sentence that might change their lives, Daniel Whitmore returned to his office, knowing that by the end of this day, something in all 3 of their futures would no longer look the same. Daniel Whitmore closed the conference room door and walked slowly down the quiet hallway toward his private office. The late afternoon sun stretched long golden reflections across the polished floor. Most of the staff had already left for the day. A few office lights remained on behind glass doors where employees finished reports or answered final emails. But Daniel's mind was no longer on the company. It was on the woman sitting outside with her daughter. Inside his office, he removed his jacket and placed it neatly over the back of the chair. Then he sat at his desk and opened Monica Carter's application again. For the 3rd time that day, most executives would have already made the decision. Hire or decline. Efficiency demanded it. But Daniel had learned something during 20 years of building Whitmore Strategic Consulting. The most important decisions were rarely the fastest ones. He reread her employment history, temporary positions, short contracts, the clinic, the church office, then the 3-month gap. Not laziness, circumstances. Daniel leaned back in his chair and stared out the window. Chicago stretched beneath him in layered lines of steel and glass, a city full of ambition and noise and invisible battles people fought every day just to keep their lives balanced. His phone buzzed quietly on the desk. Linda Reyes. Daniel answered. Yes? They're still waiting, Linda said softly. Her tone carried something unusual, not impatience, concern. Daniel glanced toward the door. How's Annie? Coloring, Linda replied. She's drawn a rocket ship, a dog, and something that might be a purple elephant. Daniel allowed himself a brief smile. And Monica? Linda hesitated. She looks like someone waiting for a judge's verdict. Daniel understood that feeling well. Give me 2 minutes, he said. He ended the call. For another moment he remained seated, thinking. Then he pressed the intercom button. Linda. Yes? Please ask Miss Carter to come in. There was a pause. And Annie? Linda asked. Daniel considered. Bring her too. A minute later the door opened. Monica stepped in first, her expression calm but guarded. Annie followed closely beside her, still holding the purple crayon Linda had given her. Daniel stood. Please sit. They did. Annie climbed carefully into the chair beside her mother. Daniel returned to his seat but did not immediately speak. Silence stretched for several seconds. Monica watched him carefully. She had learned the hard way that silence often meant bad news. Finally, Daniel folded his hands on the desk. Miss Carter, he said. I've reviewed your interview and your application. Monica nodded once. And? Daniel glanced briefly toward Annie before answering. I believe you can do this job. The words landed gently, but their impact was immediate. Monica's shoulders dropped just slightly, as if the weight of the past several months had shifted by an inch, but she didn't smile yet. Experience had taught her that approval often came with conditions. Daniel continued. However, he said, this position is demanding. It requires attention to detail, strong communication, and the ability to manage chaos when necessary. Monica nodded. I understand, and I do not make hiring decisions based on sympathy. I wouldn't want you to. That answer came instantly. Daniel appreciated that. He leaned forward slightly. I'm offering you the position of executive assistant to the director of operations. For the first time, Annie gasped quietly. Monica blinked. You're offering me the job? Yes. The room became very still. Monica's hands tightened together in her lap. For several seconds she didn't speak. Then she said the one thing Daniel had not expected. Why? Daniel tilted his head slightly. You gave strong answers in the interview. That can't be the only reason. Daniel considered that. Finally, he answered honestly. Because competence matters more to me than polish. Monica absorbed that. And because, Daniel added, I believe you understand responsibility in ways that cannot be taught in training seminars. For a moment, Monica said nothing. Then she looked down at Annie. The little girl was staring wide-eyed between them. Mom, Annie whispered. Monica's voice trembled just slightly. It means I got the job. Annie jumped out of her chair. Mom. She wrapped both arms around Monica's waist in a tight hug. Monica laughed softly, the sound breaking through months of pressure like sunlight through clouds. Daniel looked away politely, giving them the moment. After a few seconds, Annie stepped back, beaming. You see? She said proudly. Monica raised an eyebrow. See what? I told him you were the best one. Daniel almost laughed. Monica shook her head, embarrassed but amused. I'm sorry about that. Daniel waved the apology away. Actually, he said, your daughter made an excellent argument this morning. Annie grinned. Monica sighed softly. I'll be having a long conversation with her about walking into office buildings alone. That would be wise, Daniel said. But, he added after a moment, her courage is something you should keep. Annie looked pleased with that. Daniel reached for a folder on his desk and slid it across the table. This contains your employment agreement, salary information, and benefit details. Monica opened it slowly. Her eyes widened. Daniel noticed. Yes, he said calmly. The salary is correct. Monica looked up. This is more than I expected. It's the standard rate for the position. She closed the folder carefully. I won't disappoint you. Daniel believed her. Your start date would be Monday, he said. Monica nodded. That gives me time to arrange care for my mother. How is she? Better, Monica replied. But she'll need help for a while. Daniel made a small note. We offer flexible scheduling for the first month if needed. Monica looked surprised again. Thank you. Annie tugged gently on her mother's sleeve. Mom. Yes? Does this mean we can buy real groceries now? Daniel laughed before he could stop himself. Monica covered her face briefly with one hand. Yes, she said, smiling. Real groceries. Annie seemed satisfied with that. Daniel stood. Monica rose as well. Welcome to Whitmore Strategic Consulting, Miss Carter. She shook his hand firmly. Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. As Monica and Annie walked toward the door, Annie suddenly turned back. Mr. Whitmore? Yes? You asked me a question this morning. I remember. Annie thought carefully. You said if my mom got the job, what would she do first? Daniel nodded. Yes. Annie smiled proudly. She's still going to buy groceries. Daniel laughed again. That sounds like a very good first plan. When the door closed behind them, the office felt different, quieter, but somehow fuller. Daniel walked back to the window and looked down at the moving city. In business school, they taught about strategy, markets, leverage, and risk, but no textbook ever mentioned the quiet power of a 6-year-old girl walking into a corporate office with a folder in her hands, and how sometimes that was exactly the moment a life changed direction. Monday morning arrived with a cool wind moving through the streets of downtown Chicago. The city was just beginning its weekly rhythm again, coffee shops filling with commuters, buses sighing to a stop at crowded corners, and office towers slowly lighting up floor by floor. For Monica Carter, the morning carried a weight she hadn't felt in months. Hope. She stood at the small kitchen counter in her apartment, buttoning the cuffs of a freshly pressed white blouse. It wasn't new, she had bought it at a thrift store 2 years earlier, but today it looked different. Today it looked like a beginning. Across the room, Annie sat at the tiny table eating cereal while swinging her feet under the chair. You look fancy, Mom, Annie said. Monica smiled. That's because today is my first day at work. Annie nodded seriously, as if this were the most important event of the year. You're going to do great, she said. Monica laughed softly. You sound like my mother. Right on cue, a voice called from the bedroom. I heard that. Monica walked down the short hallway to check on her mother, Evelyn Carter, who sat propped up against pillows with a blanket across her lap. Her breathing was steadier than it had been the previous week, but she still looked tired. You should still be resting, Monica said gently. I've rested enough, Evelyn replied. Besides, I wanted to see you before you left. Monica sat on the edge of the bed. You don't have to worry about anything today, Evelyn continued. Mrs. Jenkins from downstairs is coming up later to sit with me. I know. And Annie walks to school with the Wilson kids. I know. Evelyn studied her daughter's face. You're nervous. Monica exhaled. A little. Her mother smiled knowingly. That's because you care. Monica squeezed her hand. Then she stood and returned to the kitchen. Backpack ready? She asked Annie. Annie held it up proudly. Lunch packed? Yes. Homework? Already inside. Monica nodded approvingly. Then we should go. The walk to the bus stop was brisk. Autumn had begun to paint the trees along the street in shades of gold and red. Annie skipped ahead on the sidewalk before slowing to match her mother's pace. Mom? Yes? Do people at your office know about me? Monica smiled. Oh, I think they do. Because of the interview? Yes. Annie looked pleased with that. At the school corner, Annie hugged her mother quickly before running to join 2 other children waiting near the crossing guard. Monica watched for a moment before turning toward the bus stop. 20 minutes later, she stood outside the glass entrance of Whitmore Strategic Consulting. The building looked just as tall as it had the first day, but today she felt different walking through the doors. Inside, the lobby guard nodded politely. Morning. Good morning, Monica replied. She rode the elevator to the executive floor. When the doors opened, Linda Reyes was already at the reception desk with a coffee mug and a stack of folders. Linda looked up and smiled immediately. Right on time. Monica laughed nervously. I wasn't sure if arriving 20 minutes early would seem strange. Linda shook her head. Not in this office. She stood and walked around the desk. Welcome to the team, Monica. Thank you. Linda handed her a visitor badge. We'll get your permanent ID later today. First day paperwork. Monica clipped the badge to her jacket. Linda gestured toward the hallway. Let me show you your desk. They walked past several glass offices into the operations department. Monica stopped. A workstation near the window held a computer, a notepad, a phone system console, and a neatly arranged set of folders labeled with the company logo. This is yours, Linda said. Monica ran a hand lightly across the desk. For a moment, she didn't speak. It had been a long time since she had a place that felt like it belonged to her professionally. Linda watched her carefully. You okay? Monica nodded. Yes. Good. Linda lowered her voice. The director of operations will meet with you later this morning. But first, she pointed down the hallway. Mr. Whitmore asked to see you. Monica blinked. Already? Linda smiled knowingly. He gets curious about the people he hires. Monica straightened her shoulders. Where is he? Linda pointed toward the corner office. Monica walked slowly down the hallway. The door to Daniel Whitmore's office was half open. She knocked lightly. "Come in." Daniel stood near the window reviewing something on a tablet. He looked up as she entered. "Good morning, Miss Carter." "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore." He gestured toward a chair. "Please." Monica sat. Daniel set the tablet aside. "How was your commute?" "Smooth." "And Annie?" "On her way to school." Daniel nodded. "That's good." For a moment he studied her. "You look ready." "I am." He leaned back slightly. "First days can feel overwhelming. I've had overwhelming jobs before." Daniel believed that. He opened a folder on his desk. "I wanted to speak with you briefly before the morning begins." "Yes, sir. Because there's something you should know." Monica felt a small knot of concern tighten in her stomach. Daniel continued calmly. "The person you'll be assisting directly is Margaret Doyle." Monica nodded slowly. "The Director of Operations?" "Yes." Daniel watched her reaction carefully. "She built most of this company's internal systems." "That sounds impressive." "It is," Daniel said. Then he added quietly, "She's also very demanding." Monica almost smiled. "I've worked for demanding people before." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "Margaret believes discipline creates excellence. She doesn't tolerate shortcuts." "That sounds fair." Daniel nodded. "I told her about you." Monica's eyebrows lifted. "And she said she would judge for herself." Monica appreciated that answer. Daniel studied her one last moment. "Before you go," he said, "there's something else." "Yes." He gestured toward the city outside the window. "You'll see a lot of success in this building." Monica followed his gaze toward the skyline. "But you'll also see pressure," he continued. "Long hours, high expectations. I'm ready for that." Daniel nodded once. "I thought you might be." He stood. "Margaret's office is at the end of the hall." Monica rose too. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Whitmore." Daniel gave a small nod. "You earned the opportunity." Monica left the office and walked down the hallway. At the final door, she paused and knocked. A voice answered immediately. "Come in." Monica stepped inside. Margaret Doyle sat behind a large desk reviewing a thick report. She looked up. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and direct. "You must be Monica Carter." "Yes, ma'am." Margaret studied her for several seconds. Then she closed the report. "Mr. Whitmore tells me you have potential." Monica stood calmly. "I plan to prove him right." Margaret's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes flickered. "Good," she said. Then she pointed to the chair across from her desk. "Sit down." Monica did. Margaret folded her hands. "Let's see what you can actually do." Outside the office windows, the morning sun climbed higher over Chicago, and in a small corner office of Whitmore Strategic Consulting, Monica Carter's real test was just beginning. Margaret Doyle did not waste time on pleasantries. She opened a thick binder on her desk and slid a printed sheet toward Monica. "Let's start with something simple," she said. Monica glanced down. The page contained a messy schedule of meetings, client calls, travel bookings, and overlapping appointments for the week. Several times were circled. Notes were scribbled in the margins. A few lines were crossed out entirely. It looked like chaos. Margaret folded her arms. "This," she said calmly, "is what my calendar looked like last Thursday before my previous assistant resigned." Monica looked up briefly. "She resigned?" Margaret nodded once. After 3 months, Monica returned her attention to the page. "What would you like me to do with it?" she asked. Margaret's expression remained neutral. "Fix it." Monica nodded slowly. "All right." She picked up the pen beside the paper and began studying the entries. For the next 2 minutes, she said nothing. Margaret watched her carefully. Many applicants panicked during this exercise. They tried to impress her with quick answers, complicated explanations, or confident guesses. Monica did none of that. Instead, she examined the page methodically. Her finger traced the timeline. 9 a.m. meeting with logistics team. 9:30 investor call. 10 a.m. conference presentation. 11 a.m. client visit across town. Monica circled 2 entries. "These 2 meetings can't happen as written," she said. Margaret leaned back slightly. "Why not?" "The investor call is scheduled to last 40 minutes. "Yes, and the conference presentation starts 30 minutes after it begins." Margaret nodded once. "Continue." Monica crossed out the investor call time and rewrote it. "That call moves to 8:15, she said. Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Why that early?" "Because investors prefer earlier hours, and because it prevents the schedule from collapsing before the morning even begins. Margaret did not comment. Monica continued reviewing the page. She moved the client visit to early afternoon. She rearranged 2 staff meetings into a single block. She added travel time where none had been considered. Finally, she set down the pen. Margaret looked at the page. You shortened 1 meeting. Yes. Why? Because 2 hours discussing operational updates is inefficient, Monica said calmly. If the meeting requires that long, it should be split into 2 separate agendas. Margaret studied her. You've been here less than an hour, she said, and you're already redesigning my management structure. Monica met her gaze. I'm reorganizing time. That's what assistants do. For a moment, Margaret said nothing. Then she leaned forward and examined the revised schedule again. Her finger tapped the paper once. You added 15 minutes between these 2 meetings. Yes. Why? Monica answered simply. Because human beings need time to walk from one place to another. Margaret sat back. A faint hint of amusement appeared in her eyes. That is correct. Monica waited. Margaret closed the binder. Most applicants try to impress me with complicated solutions. I prefer practical ones. Margaret nodded slowly. Good. She stood and walked to a whiteboard mounted on the wall. Now the second test. She wrote 3 names on the board. 3 executives. 3 different departments. Then she added 4 project deadlines. All 4 projects need approval this week, Margaret said. Each executive believes their project is the most important. Monica studied the board. And? Tell me how you would schedule them without starting a war. Monica thought for several seconds. Then she stood and walked closer to the board. She pointed to the first name. This department affects external clients. Margaret nodded. Which means delays affect revenue. Yes. Monica wrote a small star next to it. First priority. She moved to the second name. This department manages internal systems. Yes. Important, Monica said. But internal delays can be explained. Margaret watched carefully. And the third? She asked. Monica read the final project description. Long-term development. Yes. Monica wrote a small number 3 beside it. That one moves to Friday. Margaret tilted her head. Why? Because long-term projects survive short delays. Margaret studied her. And how would you tell the third executive that? Monica smiled faintly. I wouldn't say delay, she said. I would say preparation time. Margaret laughed softly. The sound surprised both of them. You've done this before, she said. Different offices, Monica replied, but the same human behavior. Margaret erased the board. When she turned back, her expression had shifted slightly, less skeptical, more interested. Tell me something, Miss Carter. Yes, ma'am. Why did your daughter walk into our building to defend you? Monica exhaled quietly. Because she believes effort should matter. Margaret studied her for several seconds. Does it? Yes. Margaret folded her arms. Sometimes it doesn't. That's true. But when effort meets the right opportunity, Monica said, things change. Margaret nodded slowly. Mr. Whitmore said something similar. Monica didn't respond. Margaret walked back to her desk. You start handling scheduling this afternoon, she said. Yes, ma'am. And tomorrow you'll sit in on operations meetings. All right. Margaret paused. One more thing. Monica waited. If you ever feel overwhelmed, ask questions. I will. Margaret smiled slightly. Good. Monica turned to leave. But just before reaching the door, Margaret spoke again. Miss Carter. Monica turned back. Your daughter, Margaret said, is welcome to visit the office any time. Monica blinked in surprise. Thank you. Margaret shrugged lightly. Anyone brave enough to negotiate with Daniel Whitmore deserves at least one tour of the building. Monica smiled. I'll tell her that. As Monica stepped back into the hallway, Linda looked up from the reception desk. Well? She asked. Monica exhaled slowly. I think I survived. Linda grinned. Then you're doing better than the last assistant already. Down the hallway, Daniel Whitmore stepped out of his office just in time to see Monica walking back toward her desk. He didn't say anything, but he watched quietly for a moment, because sometimes the most important change in a company didn't arrive with a boardroom announcement. Sometimes it walked through the door on a Monday morning, carrying nothing more than determination, experience, and the quiet courage of a little girl who believed her mother deserved a chance. The first week passed faster than Monica expected. By Thursday afternoon, she had already learned 3 things about Whitmore Strategic Consulting. First, the company moved quickly, faster than most places she had worked before. Decisions happened in hours, not weeks. Second, Margaret Doyle noticed everything. And third, Daniel Whitmore rarely spoke unless the conversation mattered. Monica was adjusting well. Her desk had already become the quiet center of several small but important operations: calendar coordination, meeting confirmations, document preparation, travel arrangements. The work was demanding, but it made sense to her. It was the kind of order she had built in smaller places before. Only now the stakes were larger. Late that afternoon, she was reviewing next week's meeting schedule when a soft voice interrupted. "Excuse me." Monica looked up. Daniel Whitmore stood beside her desk. She rose immediately. "Mr. Whitmore, no need to stand," he said gently. But Monica had already straightened. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "Yes." He glanced briefly at the calendar on her screen. "I see Margaret has already given you the weekly operations rotation." "Yes, sir. And?" "It's busy," Monica admitted. Daniel nodded. "That's normal." He hesitated slightly before continuing. "I was actually wondering something." Monica waited. "How is your mother doing?" The question surprised her. "She's recovering," Monica said. "The doctors adjusted her medication, and she's breathing easier this week." "That's good." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "And Annie?" Monica smiled automatically. "She loves school." Daniel noticed how quickly her face softened when she mentioned her daughter. "She talks about your office sometimes," Monica added. "My office?" "Yes." Daniel looked amused. "She says it's the place where the big decision happened." Daniel leaned lightly against the desk. "That sounds dramatic." "Children remember important moments," Monica said. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel said something unexpected. "I'd like to meet your mother." Monica blinked. "You want to meet? My mother?" "Yes." She studied his face carefully. "May I ask why?" Daniel considered the question. "I suppose curiosity," he said. "And respect." "Respect? Anyone who raised both you and Annie deserves it." Monica didn't know what to say to that. Finally, she nodded. "She would like that." "Good." Daniel glanced at his watch. "I'll stop by this weekend if that's convenient." Monica hesitated. "Our apartment is small. That doesn't bother me." She studied him again. "Saturday afternoon?" "That works." Daniel nodded once. "Thank you." He turned to leave, but as he reached the hallway, he paused. "Miss Carter?" "Yes?" "There's something else." She waited. Daniel spoke slowly. "What is your mother's name?" "Evelyn Carter." The moment the name left her lips, something changed. Daniel stopped moving. His expression didn't exactly shift, but something in his eyes did. A distant recognition. He turned back slowly. "Evelyn Carter?" "Yes." Daniel's voice became quieter. "Was she ever a nurse?" Monica looked surprised. "Yes. Years ago." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly as memory began pulling threads together. "What hospital?" "Cook County General," Monica said. Daniel said nothing. Inside his mind, a door opened, and behind that door lived a memory he hadn't thought about in years. He was 17 again. Rain hitting the hospital windows, the smell of disinfectant in the emergency ward, a frightened teenager sitting beside his father's hospital bed after a serious accident, doctors rushing through the hallway, machines beeping, and one calm voice telling him everything would be okay. A nurse with kind eyes and steady hands. A woman who stayed with him for hours after her shift ended because no one else had arrived yet. Daniel returned to the present slowly. "You said her name is Evelyn Carter." "Yes." "How long ago did she retire?" "About 8 years." Daniel nodded slowly. "Does she still live on the south side?" "Yes." Daniel looked out the window for a moment, then back at Monica. "I think," he said carefully, "your mother may have helped my family once." Monica frowned slightly. "Helped?" Daniel gave a small, thoughtful nod. "A long time ago. For the first time since she started working there." Monica saw something unexpected in Daniel Whitmore's expression. Not authority, not calculation, gratitude. "I look forward to meeting her," he said quietly. Monica nodded slowly. "So do I." But as Daniel returned to his office, one thought continued echoing in his mind. Life had a strange way of connecting people, and sometimes the person who once saved your family's worst night turned out to be the grandmother of the little girl who walked into your office with a job application. Saturday afternoon arrived with clear skies and the kind of mild autumn sunlight that made Chicago feel almost peaceful. Daniel Whitmore rarely drove himself anywhere on weekends. Usually a driver handled the city traffic while he reviewed reports or answered messages, but today he had chosen to drive. The address Monica had given him led south, past the polished glass towers of downtown, past the neighborhoods where restaurants and boutique stores lined the streets, and farther into quieter blocks where apartment buildings stood closer together, and the sidewalks carried the everyday rhythm of families, grocery bags, and children playing basketball in narrow alleys. Daniel parked along the curb in front of a modest brick building. It was older but clean. Someone had planted flowers in small boxes beneath the front windows. The paint on the doorframe had been carefully maintained, even if the wood beneath showed its age. He sat in the car for a moment before stepping out. Some visits required preparation. This was one of them. Inside the building, the hallway smelled faintly of laundry soap and cooking spices. A radio played somewhere behind a closed door. Daniel caught theirs and knocked on apartment 3B. The door opened almost immediately. Annie stood there. Her face lit up. "Mr. Whitmore." Daniel smiled. "Hello, Annie. You came." "I said I would." She stepped aside excitedly. "Mom, he's here." Monica appeared from the small living room, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Mr. Whitmore," she said with a polite nod. "Please come in." Daniel stepped inside. The apartment was small but carefully kept. A narrow couch faced a coffee table covered with school papers and colored pencils. A bookshelf in the corner held several worn novels, children's books, and a few medical textbooks that looked decades old. The kitchen was visible just beyond the living room, where something warm and savory was cooking on the stove. Monica noticed Daniel glance toward it. "Chicken and rice," she said with a faint smile. "My mother insisted on cooking." Daniel nodded politely. "I appreciate the invitation." Annie tugged lightly on his sleeve. "Grandma's in the chair." She led him toward the far side of the room. Evelyn Carter sat near the window in a comfortable armchair with a blanket over her knees. Her gray hair was pulled back neatly, and though her body looked thinner than it once must have been, her eyes were sharp and alert. Daniel stopped. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Evelyn studied him carefully. Then her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Well now," she said slowly. "That face looks familiar." Daniel smiled faintly. "I was hoping you might say that." Evelyn leaned forward a little. "You're Daniel Whitmore?" "Yes, ma'am." Monica looked between them. "You two know each other?" Evelyn nodded slowly. "Not personally," she said. "But I remember him." Daniel stepped closer. "Cook County General Hospital," he said quietly. "Emergency wing," Evelyn replied. 17 years ago." She smiled softly. "You were the scared young man sitting beside his father's bed." Monica blinked in surprise. "You remember that?" Evelyn chuckled gently. "When you work emergency nursing long enough, you remember the ones who look completely lost." Daniel laughed quietly. "That sounds accurate." Monica looked at him. "You never told me about that." "I hadn't realized the connection until this week," Daniel said. Evelyn motioned toward the chair beside her. "Sit down, Mr. Whitmore. Standing makes this feel too formal." Daniel sat. Annie climbed onto the couch nearby, listening closely even though she didn't fully understand the story yet. Evelyn folded her hands over the blanket. "Your father was in a car accident," she said. Daniel nodded. "Yes, you stayed there all night." "I remember. You kept asking if he was going to die." Daniel smiled faintly. "I was 17. You were a boy who loved his father," Evelyn corrected gently. Monica listened carefully. Evelyn continued, "Your mother didn't arrive until early morning." Daniel nodded again. "She had been traveling." Evelyn looked at him thoughtfully. "You refused to leave the hospital room." Daniel leaned back slightly. "I remember someone bringing me coffee." "That was me," Evelyn said. "You sat with me for hours." "That's part of the job." Daniel shook his head. "No, it was kindness." The room fell quiet. After a moment, Evelyn waved her hand dismissively. "Nurses do small things like that every day." Daniel looked around the apartment. "But sometimes those small things stay with people longer than you realize." Annie raised her hand suddenly. "Grandma." "Yes, baby?" "Did you save Mr. Whitmore's dad?" Evelyn laughed softly. "No, sweetheart. The doctors saved him." Annie thought about that. "But you helped." Evelyn smiled. "I suppose I did." Daniel looked at Annie. "Your grandmother helped me more than she knows." Monica watched the exchange with growing curiosity. "So that's why you wanted to visit?" Daniel nodded. "Partly." "Partly?" He looked at Evelyn again. "Mostly because I wanted to say thank you." Evelyn tilted her head. You've already done that today. Daniel shook his head slowly. No, he said. What I did was hire your daughter. Monica raised an eyebrow. And that's not the same thing? Daniel looked at Annie, then back at Evelyn. No, he said quietly. It isn't. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the window, warming the small apartment. And for the first time since Annie had walked into his office with that manila folder in her hands, Daniel Whitmore began to understand something important. Life had not simply brought their paths together by coincidence. Sometimes the good you place into the world returns years later in ways you never expect. Monday morning of the third week began like any other at Whitmore Strategic Consulting, fast, organized, and full of quiet urgency. But by 10 o'clock, something felt different. Monica noticed it first. She had just finished confirming a logistics meeting when Margaret Doyle stepped out of her office with a file clutched tightly under her arm. Her expression was sharper than usual, the kind that made employees sit a little straighter in their chairs. Conference room, Margaret said firmly. 10 minutes. Monica looked up from her desk. Is this the operations review? No, Margaret replied. This is something else. She continued down the hallway without further explanation. Within minutes, the department began moving, directors gathering tablets, assistants carrying folders, and quiet conversations filling the corridor. Monica opened the digital calendar and quickly added the emergency meeting. Whitmore, Executive Operations Review, 10:15 a.m., Conference Room A. Daniel Whitmore arrived exactly at 10:15. He walked into the room with the calm composure people associated with leadership, but Monica could tell immediately something serious had happened. His expression was thoughtful, not angry, but focused in the way people became when a problem had no easy solution. The executives took their seats. Margaret stood near the screen at the front of the room. Thank you for coming on short notice, she said. Daniel nodded for her to continue. Margaret tapped the screen. A chart appeared. Revenue projections, client retention, operational expenses. Then a second chart replaced it. Red numbers, lower projections, a noticeable dip in one of the company's largest contract divisions. The room grew quiet. Margaret spoke plainly. Our primary logistics partner has terminated their contract early. A murmur moved around the table. Daniel leaned forward slightly. When? Effective in 30 days. Another silence followed. The logistics contract had been responsible for nearly a third of the company's consulting revenue. Losing it meant more than a simple inconvenience. It meant restructuring, budget changes, staff reviews. Monica sat near the end of the table, taking notes quickly. Margaret continued. They've decided to move operations to a competing firm. Why? One of the directors asked. Margaret didn't hesitate. They claim our scheduling coordination has become inconsistent over the past quarter. Daniel's eyes shifted slightly. Scheduling? Margaret nodded. Specifically, the logistics calendar management system. Monica felt a small knot tighten in her stomach. Scheduling coordination had been handled by the previous executive assistant before she arrived. Margaret glanced briefly toward Monica, then back to the room. We are reviewing the situation. One of the directors leaned forward. Is this a mistake in the system? Possibly. Daniel finally spoke. What evidence did they provide? Margaret tapped the screen again. Several examples appeared. Missed confirmations, delayed meeting updates, incorrect appointment records. Daniel studied the list. Most of the entries were dated before Monica had started working at the company, but the outside client likely didn't know that. To them, the issue looked like a current operational failure. Daniel spoke quietly. Can this be corrected? Margaret folded her arms. If we can prove the errors originated in outdated records, yes. And if we can't, Margaret answered calmly, then we risk losing the entire account. The weight of that statement settled across the room. For the first time since she had been hired, Monica realized how fragile new opportunities could be. She had been in the job barely 3 weeks. If the company began restructuring, new employees were often the first to go. Daniel looked around the room. We need clarity before the end of the week. Margaret nodded. I agree. The meeting ended shortly afterward. Executives returned to their offices, conversations quiet and serious. Monica walked back to her desk slowly. She reviewed the error list again. Every scheduling mistake dated back to the previous assistant, but proving that might take time, and companies rarely waited patiently when money was involved. Margaret stepped out of her office again. Monica. Yes, ma'am. Come here. Monica entered. Margaret closed the door behind them. You saw the report? Yes. Margaret studied her carefully. You are not responsible for those errors. I understand, but the clients don't know that. Monica nodded. Margaret leaned slightly against her desk. This situation may require reviewing every scheduling record from the past 6 months. Monica's mind began calculating the workload immediately. That's hundreds of entries. Yes. Margaret's voice remained calm. But if we find the exact source of the errors, we can prove the system wasn't failing. Monica looked at the list again. Then something clicked in her memory. Wait. Margaret raised an eyebrow. What is it? Monica stepped closer to the desk. These entries, they're all related to the same client branch. Margaret looked again. You're right. Monica continued thinking. The previous assistant stored calendar backups on the shared server. Margaret nodded. If those backups exist, we can compare timestamps and prove when the scheduling errors occurred, Monica finished. Margaret smiled slightly. Now you're thinking like operations. Monica hesitated. I can start reviewing the records today. Margaret shook her head. You'll need help. She opened the door and called down the hallway. Mr. Whitmore. Daniel stepped out of his office. Yes. Margaret gestured toward Monica. I believe your new assistant may have just found the beginning of our solution. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Oh, Monica explained quickly. The backup files, the timestamps, the pattern linking every error to one client department. Daniel listened carefully. When she finished, he nodded once. That's promising. Monica looked slightly uncertain. It's only a theory. Most solutions start that way. Daniel said. He paused before adding something unexpected. Start reviewing the records. Yes, sir. And Monica? Yes. If you can prove the errors were inherited from the previous system. He gave a small approving nod. You won't just save that contract. Monica waited. You'll prove exactly why I hired you. Outside the office windows, the afternoon sun continued climbing across the Chicago skyline. Inside Whitmore Strategic Consulting, the company faced one of its first serious challenges in months. And unexpectedly, the woman who had only just begun her career there might be the one who saved it. That night, long after most of Whitmore Strategic Consulting had gone dark, Monica Carter was still sitting at her desk. The lights in the operations wing were dimmed, leaving only a few overhead fixtures glowing softly above the workstations. Outside the windows, Chicago shimmered with nighttime energy traffic lights blinking along the streets, taxis sliding through intersections, and the river reflecting the city's neon skyline. But Monica barely noticed any of it. Her attention remained fixed on the computer screen. 6 months of scheduling records filled the monitor. Calendar backups, meeting logs, timestamp data. Margaret Doyle had been right. It was hundreds of entries. Monica leaned forward, rubbing the bridge of her nose before scrolling through another page of records. Okay, she murmured quietly to herself. Let's see where you went wrong. Across the office floor, Daniel Whitmore stepped out of his office and noticed the glow of her desk lamp. He checked his watch. Dokuz, Kirk PM. He walked toward her workstation. You're still here. Monica looked up quickly. Mr. Whitmore, you should have gone home hours ago. I will, she said, but I think I'm close. Daniel studied the screen. Rows of meeting entries filled the page. Have you found anything? Patterns, Monica replied. She clicked open another document. These errors all happened in the same department, logistics planning. Daniel nodded. That's the client who ended the contract. Yes. Monica highlighted several entries. But look at the timestamps. Daniel leaned closer. Each calendar entry showed 2 times. Original entry. Modification time. The changes were made after the meetings were already scheduled. Monica said. Daniel frowned slightly. So someone edited them later. Yes. She scrolled further, and every change came from the same login. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Whose account? Monica clicked the final column. The name appeared. S. Daniel's expression sharpened. Stephen Kramer. Monica nodded slowly. He's the regional logistics manager for the client company. Daniel straightened. You're saying the scheduling errors didn't originate here? No. They were edited from the client side. Daniel folded his arms thoughtfully. That means the mistakes were never ours. Exactly. Monica leaned back in her chair. But proving it will require compiling all the logs. Daniel nodded slowly. That could restore the contract. Monica smiled faintly. That's the idea. Daniel looked impressed. You found this in one afternoon. Not quite, Monica admitted. I've been working since lunch. Daniel glanced again at the dark office around them. You should go home. Monica saved the file. I will. She shut down the monitor and gathered her things. I just need to finish the report tomorrow morning. Daniel nodded. Good work. Thank you. They rode the elevator down together in comfortable silence. When the doors opened into the lobby, the security guard looked up from his desk. Late night again, Mr. Whitmore? Seems so. Monica stepped outside into the cool evening air. Good night, Mr. Whitmore. Good night, Monica. As she walked toward the bus stop, Daniel watched for a moment before returning to his car. Neither of them realized yet that the most important piece of evidence still hadn't been discovered. The next afternoon, Monica worked from home. Stacks of printed scheduling reports covered the small coffee table in the apartment. Highlighters, sticky notes, laptop open. Her mother watched from the armchair with quiet amusement. You work like a detective, Evelyn said. Monica said, It feels like it. Across the room, Annie sat on the floor coloring. Every few minutes, she glanced curiously at the piles of papers. Mom? Yes. What are you looking for? Proof, Monica said. Of what? That someone made mistakes that weren't ours. Annie considered that. Then she crawled closer to the table. Can I see? Monica hesitated. Just don't move anything. Annie nodded seriously. She studied the papers like they were puzzle pieces. After a few seconds, she pointed to one of the printed logs. Mom? Yes. This one looks funny. Monica leaned over. Why? The numbers are backwards. Monica frowned. What do you mean? Annie pointed to the timestamp. See? The time says 2:30 p.m. But the meeting happened in the morning. Monica blinked. She grabbed the page. The timestamp format had switched from standard time to international format, which meant the editing system had recorded the changes through a different server, a client-side server, exactly the proof they needed. Monica's eyes widened. Oh my goodness. What? Annie asked. Monica grabbed her laptop and typed quickly. The system logs confirmed it. Every altered entry had passed through the client company's external server, which meant the errors were never created at Whitmore Strategic Consulting. They were introduced afterward. Monica stared at the screen in disbelief. Annie, yes, you just found the missing piece. Annie beamed proudly. I did? Yes. Her grandmother laughed softly from the chair. Well, look at that. Monica pulled Annie into a quick hug. You just helped save my job. Annie grinned. I told you I'm good at puzzles. That evening, Monica emailed the full report to Margaret Doyle and Daniel Whitmore. When Daniel opened the message an hour later, he read the evidence twice. Then he smiled, because the truth was now undeniable. The contract had been threatened by someone else's mistake, and the person who uncovered it was the same woman who had once walked into his office with nothing but determination and a daughter who believed she deserved a chance. Monday morning arrived with an unusual calm inside Whitmore Strategic Consulting, but Daniel Whitmore already knew the day would not remain calm for long. He sat in his office reviewing Monica Carter's report for the third time. The evidence she had compiled during the weekend was precise, organized, and impossible to ignore. Server logs, timestamp records, calendar backup comparisons, and one critical discovery. Every scheduling error that had triggered the client's complaint had originated from the client's own logistics server, not from Whitmore Strategic Consulting. Daniel leaned back in his chair slowly. The situation had shifted completely. This was no longer a defensive conversation. Now it was a negotiation. He pressed the intercom button. Linda. Yes, Mr. Whitmore? Please ask Margaret Doyle and Monica Carter to join me in the conference room. Right away. A few minutes later, Margaret entered first, carrying Monica's printed report. Monica followed quietly behind her. Daniel stood. Good morning. Morning, Margaret replied. Monica nodded politely. Good morning, Mr. Whitmore. Daniel gestured toward the screen at the front of the room. The client representatives will join us on a call in 10 minutes. Margaret sought. Monica took a seat beside her, notebook already open. Margaret glanced sideways at her. You slept at least a little, I hope. A few hours. Margaret smirked faintly. That counts. Daniel turned toward the screen just as the video call connected. 3 executives appeared. Stephen Kramer sat in the center frame. Regional Logistics Manager, the same name Monica had discovered in the system logs. Daniel greeted them calmly. Good morning. Morning, Kramer replied. We appreciate you meeting on short notice, Daniel said. Kramer nodded stiffly. As we discussed, our company has decided to move forward with another consulting partner. Daniel folded his hands. Yes. You explained that your decision was based on repeated scheduling failures. Correct. Margaret tapped the keyboard and projected Monica's report onto the screen. We reviewed the situation carefully, she said. Kramer leaned forward slightly. And, Margaret glanced briefly at Monica before continuing. We found something interesting. She highlighted the server timestamps. These calendar modifications were not made inside our system. Kramer's expression tightened. What are you suggesting? Daniel spoke calmly. We're not suggesting anything. He pointed to the data. We're showing you exactly what happened. Monica turned the page of the report and displayed the server log comparison. Every schedule change originated from your internal server login, she explained. Kramer's face changed slightly. That's impossible. Monica kept her voice steady. The timestamps confirm it. Margaret added. Your department edited the meeting records after they were created. Silence filled the call. The other executives on Kramer's team began scanning the report quickly. One of them leaned forward. Stephen, these logs are real. Kramer said nothing. Daniel spoke gently but firmly, which means the scheduling breakdown did not originate from Whitmore Strategic Consulting. Another long pause followed. Finally, the executive on Kramer's left cleared his throat. Mr. Whitmore, it appears we may have misunderstood the source of the problem. Daniel nodded once. That happens, the man continued. In that case, we may need to reconsider the contract termination. Margaret folded her arms calmly. That would be wise. The call ended 10 minutes later. The contract was restored. Not only restored, extended for another year. When the screen finally went dark, the conference room fell silent. Margaret turned toward Monica. Well done. Monica exhaled slowly. Thank you. Daniel smiled slightly. You didn't just fix a scheduling problem. Monica looked at him. You protected the company. She hadn't thought of it that way. Margaret stood and saved us a very expensive legal dispute. Daniel nodded. That too. Monica closed her notebook slowly. I had help. Margaret raised an eyebrow. From whom? Monica smiled faintly. My daughter. Margaret laughed quietly. That child may need her own office soon. That evening, Daniel stopped by Monica's desk before leaving. Miss Carter. Yes? The board approved a performance bonus for the project. Monica blinked. A bonus? Yes. She shook her head slightly. I was just doing my job. Daniel leaned lightly against the desk. Doing the job well is exactly the point. He paused. And Annie deserves some credit. Monica smiled. She'll be thrilled. Daniel nodded. I suspect she will. As Monica packed her things and prepared to leave, she glanced around the office. 3 weeks ago, she had walked into the building unsure if she even belonged there. Now she knew. Opportunity had arrived in the most unexpected way, because one small girl had refused to let her mother give up. Later that night, Annie sat at the kitchen table drawing another picture. This one had 3 figures standing in front of a tall building. A little girl, a woman, and a man in a suit. Above them, she carefully wrote 3 words. A good chance. Monica looked at the drawing and smiled. Because sometimes the biggest changes in life begin with something very small. A child with courage, a mother who refuses to quit, and a moment when someone powerful decides to give a chance that others refuse to see. The story reminds us that opportunity and dignity should never be judged by appearance, background, or circumstances. Annie's courage shows how powerful belief and love can be, while Monica's perseverance proves that hard work and integrity eventually reveal their value. Sometimes people only need one fair chance to change their lives. The story also teaches that kindness given in the past often returns in unexpected ways, and that true leadership means recognizing potential where others fail to see it. In the end, justice, compassion, and determination can transform not only one person's future, but the lives of everyone connected to that moment of courage. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.